a surprise to most of you to learn that the history of the Sandton congregation goes back more than 44 years. During the early 1970s, a number of Seventh-Day Adventist Church members of different congregations but living in the northern areas of Johannesburg examined the possibility of establishing a congregation in Sandton. At the time we were living here in Sandton, and we had to travel to Central Church every Sabbath, some 30 kilometers to get there and 30 kilometers back, and having difficulty finding parking, and it became a bit of a mission. So we felt the need to start a church here in the north. There was a church, of course, at Joburg North, but that church was already almost full. And so there were a number of other Adventist members living around this part of the world who also felt that we should start another church in this area. And so we contacted these members and asked them to come to a meeting, but unfortunately it didn't meet with success because the people that came were not that enthusiastic. And so the desire to have a church one day here in Sandton became stronger and stronger because of the problems of travel and parking and so on. And so the seed of desire to one day have a congregation had been sown, and eventually some 13 years later, in 1983, at the instigation of a number of members who had become convinced that the time had now arrived to again attempt to establish a congregation in Sandton, a meeting was called to discuss the matter. We approached all the church clerks of the churches in the northern suburbs to establish how many of them were living in the Sandton area and if they could provide us with telephone numbers. And so we decided to send out letters of invitation for them to attend a meeting, and also we found a number of people to be sure that they would attend. And the meeting was held in the Sandton Holiday Inn on the corner of Rivonia and Catherine Street on the 17th of October 1983. Under the chairmanship of myself. And I was also assisted at that time by Pastor David Peckham, who was the pastor of the Johannesburg North Church at the time. And altogether 75 adults attended that meeting. And during the discussions that followed, it was stressed that in order for the new fledgling congregation to succeed, it would be imperative that a nucleus of members would need to be prepared to resign from their existing congregations and make an irrevocable commitment to the new congregation. It was also pointed out that these members would have to recognize and accept the inconvenience, the sacrifices of meeting a hired and perhaps not ideal premises, and the additional financial demands and greater personal involvement in the programs of the new church. This nucleus of members should also be able to provide the necessary leadership and have sufficient musicians to successfully sustain and direct the affairs and programs of such a new congregation. That meeting took about an hour and a half of talking backwards and forwards and asking questions and discussing what would be required and so on. And at the end of the meeting, we asked for a commitment. 29 adults indicated that they were prepared to make the commitment needed. And fortuitously, this nucleus of members could, with their combined talents, provide the required leadership and skills needed to make the new congregation viable. And so the decision was taken that by God's grace and guidance, we would proceed in faith with the founding of a new congregation to be known as the Sandton Congregation of Seventh-Day Adventist Church, and that it would be situated somewhere in the Sandton area. It was also decided that we commence with services on Sabbath, the 7th of January, 1984. So we had a time frame of the 23rd of October to the 7th of January in which to find premises and prepare ourselves to start the congregation. This was an act of faith in the providence of God, as at that time we had no idea of where we would meet. A subcommittee under my chairmanship was appointed to search for a suitable venue. After an extensive search, during which we tried every known church and hall in the area, at the 11th hour, just 2 weeks before we were scheduled to hold our first meeting, God in His providence provided for us. What happened was that I was driving in South Road from the Holiday Inn on South Road going down the hill, when I saw for the first, and I mean I've been down that road many times, I saw on the corner of Middle Road and South Road a low building, looked like a house. I've never noticed it before, but that day, I saw a sign which said that it was the Assemblies of God's Church. So I thought to myself, now this is the only place that I haven't yet approached in the last 3 months. And I prayed, and I was told by the Lord to go and speak to the pastor. So I drove into the parking lot. There were a number of cars in the parking lot. I saw somebody that came out and I said, excuse me, what is the name of your pastor? They said his name is Pastor Gibson. I said, is he here? Yes, they said he's just busy finishing the meeting. He'll be coming out into the car park shortly. In fact, I'd been playing tennis that afternoon, so I was in my tennis shorts. I saw the gentleman come, and so I got out of my car and I introduced myself to him. I said, I'm Louis van Aswegen. I am a Seventh-day Adventist. I have been tasked to find premises for us to start a new church in Sandton. He had a big grin on his face. He said, I know all about you Seventh-day Adventists. He said, I was introduced to the Lord by a Seventh-day Adventist in Bloemfontein. It is because of his influence and his witness that I am today a pastor in the Assemblies of God Church. And he said, my brother, he says, I would be only too happy to let you use our premises. Why don't you come and have a look at the premises? So there I was in my shorts and sandals, and I had a look, and this was a lovely church. It was the first time I'd been in a church where the chairs were arranged very much like they are here. Normally a church is long and narrow, but that church was like this, where we were all nearby, and they had classrooms for our children's program and everything. So I said to him, that is fantastic. He said, that we have a snag. He said, I can't just make this decision on my own. I have to take it to our church board. I said, well, we have a problem. We need to move and be ready to start on the 7th of January. And we were now 2 weeks into December. He said to me, it just so happens that we're having a board meeting tomorrow evening. Why don't you come to the board meeting and present your case, and we will decide on it. So this was a Sunday afternoon. On Tuesday night, I went to the board meeting, and he introduced me as a Seventh-day Adventist. He told his church board that he was a minister of the gospel because of the witness that he had received from another Seventh-day Adventist. And so he asked me to put my case. I said, this is what we would like to do, start a new church here in Sandton. We just need a place to worship to start with, and eventually we will be big enough to build. And he put the vote to the members, and they all agreed that we could use their facilities and that we could use it from the 7th of January. Now that to me was a providence of God overruling for us in our time of need. Now, we will be forever indebted to them for their assistance and their support. Now, it's interesting to note that church, if you go down South Road today, it's no longer the Assemblies of God Church, it is the Rivers Church. It's one of the biggest churches in Johannesburg. Beautiful edifice. And so on Sabbath, the 7th of January 1984, we held our first services of the new congregation in the Assemblies of God Church. The preacher for that day was Pastor Manny Harkham, and 39 adults attended and signed the attendance scroll, 22 of them as foundation members and 17 as visitors, and there were also 10 children present that day. So altogether there were 49 souls gathering in that church for our first ever meeting in the Assemblies of God Church. And on the 3rd of March 1984, that's only 2 months later, the Sandton congregation was officially constituted and recognized as a fully fledged congregation of the Transworld Conference of Seventh-Day Adventists at a service which was conducted by the President of the Transworld Conference, Pastor Johnny van Sale. We worshipped in the Assemblies of God Church for the next 3.5 years before moving to the newly built Wendywood High School. And again, God marvelously intervened in providing this much more suitable venue. What had happened was that the Assemblies of God Church was trying to establish a congregation for black people in that particular church, and they wanted the church on a Saturday, which was when we were using it. So they said to us, listen, it's not urgent, but this is our plan. Can you please look around and see if you can find another place so that we can proceed in starting another service on a Saturday. So again, we prayed for the Lord to lead and guide us. And then one day I drove past the Wendywood High School. I'd been seeing it being built, and now it was finished, it was completed. And I thought, well, a school normally has some halls, platforms, it's got a big hall and it's got classrooms and dressing rooms behind the stage. Maybe they will let us use that school. So I went to the secretary of the school and asked her if I could see the principal. And she said to me, yes, you may. I called him. I said, by the way, who is he? She says, he is Ben Brooks. I said, well, that is unbelievable. Ben Brooks and I matriculated from Pretoria Boys High School in the same year. He was in my class at Pretoria Boys High in 1957. So she ushered me into his office. I was feeling very confident. The Lord had led us, I was sure. So I introduced myself to Ben and he recognized me, and we reminisced a little bit about the days at school at Pretoria Boys High, and then I proceeded to tell him what our problem was and that we would like to use the facilities of the school on a Saturday. He said to me, Louis, this is a brand new school. We haven't even had our first intake of students. It is too early for me to tell you that they will be using the facilities on a Saturday. So I think that it's quite okay that you use the facilities on a Saturday until such time as we tell you that we need the school for our own activities. So he made me have a look, and the hall was magnificent. It had a stage, it had a piano, and it had some rooms behind the stage curtains where there were dressing rooms for people who were performing, and there were classrooms all around that could be used on a Sabbath morning. And so he agreed that we could start using that facility the very next Sabbath. So I went back to the Assemblies of God, Pastor Gibson, and I told him this is what has happened. He said, Louis, the Lord certainly leads you. And so we then moved to the Wendywood High School. And it was a much more suitable venue. Thank you, brother. It was a much more suitable venue in that we had many more classes and the hall was large and it could cater for many more people. And so by now I said the membership had grown to 59 adults with many more children to cater for, and we needed better accommodation and facilities, which were provided for us at the school. And so we moved to the school in April 1987. And we are greatly indebted to Mr. Ben Brooks, the principal, and his staff for making those facilities available to us and for all their assistance during our stay there at the school. Right from the start, it had always been our desire, and we knew that one day we would want to have a church building of our own. So as soon as the congregation was organized, we started a church building fund. And by mid-1987, this desire to have our own church building and the building fund had grown to the point where we could start looking for a site on which we could build. Thank you. On which we could build. Now, at that time, Pastor Manny Harkin, some of you may know him, was the pastor of the Orange Grove Church, but Manny Harkin was also a very astute businessman, and he had an eye for business opportunities. And so we said to him, would you help us? I said to him, would you help us find some land on which we could build this church? And so we went about looking at various sites in the Sunninghill area. And in October 1987, he came across this piece of property. It was empty at the time. 5 acres of land. I want to ask you to guess what we paid for this piece of land. Not yet? No, don't be ridiculous. But I want to tell you, you're not that ridiculous. We paid the grand sum of $47,000 for this piece of land in 1987. We could sell this property today for $20 million. If some developer was interested in tearing down the church and putting up townhouses, we could get $20 million for this 5 acres. The Lord has indeed been fantastic to us. The only problem with that piece of land at the time was that there was a design to have a 4-lane highway going through this property, linking up Kyalami with Witkoppen Road. And you will know that they've extended Pomona Road into a 2-lane highway until just before the prison. And we have been waiting all these years for them to start building the road that is going right through the middle of this property. Well, the Lord knew that that is not what He wanted for us, and we didn't want that either. And so that road has been postponed indefinitely. That is why when we built, we only built on 2.5 acres. Now I see that our cars are parked on the other side of the 2.5 acres. And what a wonderful sight to see this car park so full of cars. So we acquired this piece of land, and we were now challenged with the task of really swelling the building fund, and it began in earnest. And most of our members sacrificed greatly, and some of us even took out additional bonds on our homes. And 3 years later, on the 20th of October, the groundbreaking ceremony was held. Now, I was told by the pastor you were going to have a groundbreaking ceremony today, and then he told me, no, they discovered that the groundbreaking ceremony had already taken place, and I've got some photographs here that can verify that, where we were digging a trench right there in the car park. So we did break ground, and at the time, Pastor Hendrik Steenberg was the president of the Transvaal Conference, and the mayor of Sandton was Councillor Don Forbes, and we had a wonderful meeting here, thanking God for the way that He had led in providing us with this piece of land. To the building committee was given the arduous task of planning and then actually overseeing the building of the church. And we are indeed indebted to them, and particularly to Johan Birkenstock and then Ron Loss, who were the project managers and were largely responsible for seeing the project to its conclusion. Our thanks also go to Brother Henny Wilkins. He was a member of our church, but he is a builder by trade. He has his own building operation. So Henny Wilkins built this church for us at reduced cost. He made no profit on the building of this church. And so the building operations began early in 1991. And all we built was the hall, the foyer, the kitchen, and the toilets. We never had any classrooms. And then it took us nearly 9 months for this whole project to be finished before we moved in. And on the 30th of November 1991, after an enthusiastic move from Wendywood High School, Pastor Ian Hartley conducted the first service in our brand new church hall. 30th of November 1991, we held our first meeting in this building. The attendance that day was about 120 adults, and we had seen a steady growth in our membership over the 7 years, from the original 22 charter members to an average of approximately 100 attending every Sabbath. Now, since the founding of our congregation in 1984, we have had a number of pastors serving us. Our first pastor was Pastor Manny Harkham, who shared the responsibility of caring for us with Pastor David Peckham in those early years. Both of these men were pastors of other congregations at that time. They were followed in fairly rapid succession by Pastor Alan Hart, Pastor Andre van Rensburg, and Pastor Willie Grobler, all who spent a little more than a year each with us. Pastor Ian Hartley came to us in 1989 and spent 8 years ministering to us until March 1997. In July 1999, Pastor Bill Underwood from the USA became our pastor, and after a lengthy and extensive search for a new pastor, he served us for only 3 years into 2002. And then in May 2003, Pastor Sam Davis from the United Kingdom became our pastor for a little more than 3 years and left us in June 2006. In October 2006, Pastor Eddie Harris was appointed as our pastor, but sadly, after only 2 months, he was called to serve as the pastor of the Cape Helderberg College Church. And then after nearly 3-year period of searching and for not having a pastor, in October 2009, Dr. Vincent Goddard came to us from Tanzania, and he had just finished his term of service and had been instrumental in building a new university. During the 30-year history of our congregation, there have been 3 periods of more than 18 to 28 months each when we had no pastoral care, and we had to rely on the services and talents of our faithful leaders and members to maintain the entire program during those times. To all these dedicated men and their wives, we are indebted for their guidance and the faithful service to our congregation, and we say to them a sincere thank you. Now, during the ministry of Pastor Ian Hartley, we saw a phenomenal rapid increase in membership and attendance of many educated young people, which led to the establishment of a second worship service each Sabbath morning to cater particularly for the needs of these young people, these youth, for a more modern and relaxed worship style. And this second service became very popular and attracted many visitors, many of whom subsequently became members. And this trend of attracting visitors has continued again during the tenure of Pastor Sam Davis, and so today we have approximately 400 to 600 folk attending the 2 services every Sabbath. Now, it is quite an achievement if you think that we started with 22 and we now have about 600 folk coming to this church every Sabbath. We thank and give praise to our God for the steady growth in folk attending our church, even though most of them have not chosen to be members since our humble beginnings 30 years ago. Over the years, there has also been a steady growth in the number of children attending our church, and this has necessitated the establishment of a full range of children's Sabbath school divisions catering for all age groups. So soon after we moved to Sunninghill in 1991, we started building the first set of 3 classrooms, And since then, a few years later, another set of 3 plus the children's toilets, and then in 2000, the latest set of 3 more classrooms. Because of the surge in membership attending the Sabbath, we erected 20 shade cloth areas to accommodate the Sabbath school classes and have made improvements in the parking lots to accommodate all the cars. Also, late in 2007, we started our very first nursery school with plans to extend it to a full-scale primary school in the near future. Unfortunately, this venture did not succeed, but there is now a renewed interest in starting a new primary school because of the large number of children attending our church. Pastor Goddard, when he arrived at Sandton Church, was adamant that we should build a sanctuary to cater for the approximately 600 attendees every Sabbath. That is 300 at each of the 2 services. The capacity of our hall is only 190, as you know, and so the rest meet under the 6 large trees in the courtyard, where loudspeakers were installed to allow them to hear and see through the glass wall and doors. The intention is to build a sanctuary seating about 700, and the plans have reached an advanced stage, and we look forward to the beginning of the building program in the near future. I was impressed this morning, brother, when you announced that there were 7 million rand in the building program. That is phenomenal, and with that you can certainly start to build a fantastic church. Unfortunately, Pastor Goddard's contract of service terminated in 2013, and he will therefore not see the fulfillment of his dream. But in January 2014, Pastor Robert Hall became our new pastor, and he too is keen to see the building of a new sanctuary. Looking at the parking lot, there is evidence that the Sandton congregation is an affluent one, and as a consequence is today, would you believe it, the highest tithe-paying church in the Northern Conference. I didn't know if you were aware of that. The highest tithe-paying church in the Northern Conference. That is fantastic. And the church's expense budget for 2014, that's 2 years ago, was then 1.2 million. I don't know what it is now, but it's probably gone up a little. And the church building fund has also grown to more than 3,400,000. I wrote this report in, when did I update it? I updated it in March 2014. So 2 years later, it has grown from 3.4 million to 7 million. That is fantastic. Over the years, particularly from 1995 onward, there has been a remarkable change in the demographics of the congregation. With many immigrants from north of our borders, particularly from Zimbabwe, Zambia and Malawi, and from other local churches, as the move into the northern suburbs has taken place. As a consequence, due to the immigration of some of our early members and deaths, and the move away into retirement homes in other areas like Advent Haven in Heidelberg and elsewhere, the numbers of the Caucasian members and attendees has dwindled from the approximately 250 in 1995 to only about 40 attending regularly in 2014. God has been good to us and blessed us abundantly. Despite the various problems and challenges, we look forward with confidence to the future, knowing in whom we believe, and remembering with gratitude how that God has led us in the past. Our thanks extends to everyone who has ever had a part in any service or Sabbath school program, or as a teacher, or in any way helped to contribute in service and kind to the successful functioning of God's church here in Melindy Road in Sunnyvale. So to God be the glory for what He has done for us here at Sandton. The evidence is overwhelming that He is leading us, and we will continue to trust Him to lead us in the future. Psalm 26 verse 8 says, I love the place where you live, O Lord, the place where your glory dwells. And I think that is true of every one of us. We love the place where the Lord dwells. The Lord told Moses to build a sanctuary so that He may dwell with us, and we are an extension of that as we plan to build a sanctuary so that the Lord can also dwell with us. Thank you very much.